Welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $3 million and counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1 million worth of aid to more than 1,300 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our many events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. And without further ado, let's meet our special guest today, coming to us all the way from sunny and warm Iowa. It's the summertime, so it's usually it's a little blistery, as they say in the Midwest this time of year. And that corn needs to grow, so it's good corn growing days, I guess we'd say. But with us today, pancreatic cancer survivor, superhuman, as we like to call them, Kimberly Brockman. Welcome to the Project Purple podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Before we hit record, the podcast now, we're going almost on 7 years. And I love bringing, we call our survivors superhumans. Everyone is a survivor, whether it's day one or, day, 9,000, or 20. We've had a 20 plus year survivor on the podcast. So we like to call them superhumans because they are superhuman. So that's where that term comes from. But as I mentioned before we hit record, when the podcast started, it kind of took a good turn during COVID, and we had a lot of folks reach out to us to share their story and their journeys. And so I love it when we bring people on, especially people that I don't really know about. And as I said before, I'd love to hear your story firsthand. So with that, I'm going to hand this microphone over to you to kind of share your story, your journey with our audience here. And with that, Kimberly, the microphone is yours.
Okay. I'm not quite sure where to begin here. As you were saying, I am actually a newly pancreatic cancer survivor. I rang the bell on April 22nd, and I came out of it with a 100% response, which you don't usually see with pancreatic cancer. So I'm not in remission. I am 100% cancer-free. I'm sorry.
So
it's
awesome.
Very new. So hopefully I can get through this without it being a blubbering idiot all the way through it. But
no, you're not a blubbering idiot.
It's still very new. But so yes, I am 100% cancer-free. I had my cancer in the incident process of the head of the pancreas. So I had pancreatic adenocarcinoma. We found it it's almost a year now, last July. Or actually last May is when it kind of all started. I was going through just routine work that I was doing for preventative work. About backing it up about 2 years prior, I had found a lump on one of my breasts, and I had been having issues there for years. Off and on. I had my first lumpectomy when I was in my 30s. I'm now 57 as of actually today.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So it's been a while that I've kind of been dealing with that aspect of it. And then when I went to fill out, I had just moved back to Iowa from Florida. And when I filled out the paperwork for the family history, I suddenly got this phone call from the cancer center in Cedar Rapids. Couldn't figure out why they were calling me. I hadn't even had the mammogram yet. So I'm like, why are you calling me? So they basically told me I was eligible for genetic testing due to my background with both sides of my father and my mother, tons of cancer on both sides. And so they said that I was eligible for genetic testing. My insurance would cover it. It wouldn't be out of pocket. That I was eligible to do it. And I said, sure, fine, let's do it. Well, then COVID hit and nobody was doing anything. And during COVID, I was having some symptoms. I was having problems with regurgitating my food. I was having problems with swallowing. I was getting really, really bad heartburn and esophageal issues. And then I was having other issues with my bowels as well. So at that time, they weren't doing anything that wasn't emergent when it came to surgeries or anything like that. So I was kind of put on hold, and I hadn't gotten the genetic testing done either because of it. And I did end up calling and talking to somebody so I could get in. And at that particular time, I did have my mammogram by then, and everything was okay. There's 2 spots that they've been watching for years, so nothing's changed. So everything was okay. But when the other things came about, that was kind of scary. I had never had those issues before. And so being a former certified medical assistant and having worked in oncology, I had a lot of knowledge. So I made sure that I called, and when I got, or they fairly quickly got in because I was having issues from both ends. So they got me in, and they did a colonoscopy and an endoscopy. I was then diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus, which is precancerous to esophageal cancer. I hadn't had my genetic testing done yet. I was going to have that done the next month. So I started treatment for the Barrett's, and I did a complete 180 or 360 even change in my diet. It was a very, very drastic change too. Everything that I loved, I couldn't have anymore. And then I had to start taking this medication for the heartburn. I'm still on that today, but the Barrett's esophagus is now in remission because of the diet change that was so drastic. It took 2 years to do it, but I did it.
So when you say, let me just ask a quick question. When you say like drastic change, so did you go from like more of a carnivore style diet to like total vegan, or was it like the opposite? Like I just so the audience can kind of get some flavor here.
Sure. I didn't. I wasn't much of a carnivore in the first place, but I did like chicken, and I did like bacon, and I did like, eggs and dairy and cheese and all the things, anything acidic, anything spicy. I had to stop anything spicy, anything acidic, no dairy, no red meat, no bacon, even condiments. I had to drop down on that. Nothing spicy, nothing fried. I was really limited. So I basically then pretty much followed as much as I could of a Mediterranean diet as I could, and kept it to fish and salads and berries, nuts, just healthy eating. And I was strict about it because it scared me. So, and then my father actually passed away, and he also had, but I didn't know my father very well, so I'll just put that out there. But I know he had throat cancer. So that's where I kind of got a little concerned. I also know that my grandfather on my father's side had colon cancer. So there was that concern. And that's where the issues were coming from. So I just kind of, I took it very, very seriously, very seriously. And then a month later, I had the genetic testing done, and they said I'd hear back in about 4 to 6 weeks. They called me in 3 weeks and said, we found something. And I said, okay. And I said, what is it? And they said, it's called MSH2 Lynch Syndrome. There's 4 different ones. There's MSH6, there's MSH2, and then there's one that starts with a P, and another one that because I don't have them, I don't worry about them.
Palpy 1 and Palpy 2.
Exactly. That's them.
They're I guess they're considered, I mean, not a geneticist, but from how I've interpreted it and it's been told to me is you have Lynch syndrome and you have those MSH genes, right?
Mhm.
And then Palpy is like the cousin of Lynch.
Right.
So, and then BRCA falls in that line as well. Like when we look at the known genetics,
Mhm.
and I'm not a doctor, don't quote me on this. Anyone, you can call me out on it. I think there's 7 genes that they've identified right now that fall into pancreatic, breast, colon, melanoma, prostate, and ovarian cancer. Like that is the
You're
umbrella
almost completely correct. There's
that fall in that. I'm
something
BRCA2, so I think I
are.
I'm BRCA2, which I found out later in life, a couple years back. But I remember, looking at the chart, and those diseases are really the ones that we have to be concerned about with those 7 genes.
Yeah. Yes, you got most of them. There was another one that's bladder issues. So, and the more that they research, the more we find out. And so
So you knew so you got this diagnosis
MSH2.
Yeah. MSH2, but you had this esophagus thing going on, the Barrett's going on. Mm-hmm. But then again, so when do you get the diagnosis, or not the diagnosis, but the genetic results back? So that would put us just in a timeline here, 2021?
20? Yes. So yeah, I would say in the fall of 2021, around there. So at that point, I just started doing preventative care.
Yeah.
Part of that preventative care was a total hysterectomy and oophorectomy because my mother and my grandmother both had uterine cancer. So I did a preventative hysterectomy and oophorectomy, and I did that actually just a year ago. Wow. And then a month later, I was doing the pancreatic protocol because my mother also has pancreatic cancer. Wow. She had never had any genetic testing done. So when I got my genetic testing done, she had already been in remission, stage 3 advanced with a 20-month prognosis and inoperable.
This is your mom.
This is my mother. Wow. She's my hero. By then she had been 6 or 7 years in remission.
Wow.
Crazy. I mean, even her doctor doesn't even understand how she's still.
I'm kind of fascinated. So your mom is in Iowa as well?
She's in Kansas.
Kansas. Okay. So your mom then, if she was originally diagnosed, and I'm just trying to get timing here. So if it's 2021 when this happened, so 6 years prior, so that would be like 2014.
She was 69. She's 78 now.
Okay. So 10 years ago. So yeah, 2014 was when she was, right? 2014, 2015. So
she'll be 9 years out in August.
Okay. So then 2015. Okay.
Maybe 2015 and then 2022 maybe for me. Maybe I'm going too far back. We have what we call chemo brain. So
yeah, no. No, that's okay. The only reason why I ask about your mom, like the thing with genetics, and we talked a lot about this on the podcast, up until about 5 years ago, maybe, I feel like, COVID kind of made everything go really fast or really slow. Agreed. And genetics was something that I think was either right before COVID rolled out, but then the problem is, as you said, like no one was
just starting around then. They were just starting to really push genetics.
Yeah, but I believe the NIH, which is the governing body of like how things are done here across the board in the United States, I thought it was a mandate. No, it's irrelevant. I think it was mandated in 19, like either late 19 or mid 19, where if you were a patient and you went into a hospital, you had to have genetic testing done. but there was
we're
actually,
not
well, but this is the irony. And so this was mandated by the government and the policymakers here in the United States of healthcare.
I'm
So
glad
that,
I heard that. I didn't know that.
but this is the craziness. And this is where we talk about public healthcare systems, and we can go down a rabbit hole, which we won't. And, private healthcare systems in the United States, it's a private healthcare system, right? Even though they can't deny healthcare to anyone, which is another story.
Right.
A report was just out about 3 months ago that looked at the data on this mandate, and there's still only, I think it was like, and this number might be high, only 40% of the patients diagnosed since this mandate have been genetic tested. That is insane. So even though there is like this mandate that people need to get genetic testing, it's not happening, right? And so that's where we talk about patient advocacy, and also the fact that you need to really, we stress patients go to high volume centers versus community centers, because in the high volume centers, they're getting this testing. But now go back to your mom, that's where the interesting piece here, like she was diagnosed before there was even genetic testing. So,
years before.
There would never have been an opportunity for her to be tested when she was diagnosed, because it wasn't required. And unless she went to like a big academic center where they were doing genetic research, maybe they would have put 2 and 2 together and said, hey, like, let's do genetic testing. But even this is crazy. I mean, 9 years ago is not that long of a time. Genetic testing 9 years ago was a lot expensive than it was today. Like today it's done, you could do it for like $35. Back in 15, it was probably, and that's put back in 15, it was probably $1,000 or $2,000. And I know for a fact, if you even go back 10 years prior to like the early 2000s, it was $5,000, and insurance wouldn't cover it unless you were like, you had like 5 lines of cancer in immediate family. So it's fascinating where we have gone from, $5,000 testing to now almost free, or in some places you can get it done for free, which is just so fascinating. And where, it wasn't mandated by insurance, and now it is mandated as long as you have this family history, right? And I think right now, I was just talking to someone, I think if you have like 2 immediate family members with cancer, like you will qualify for genetic testing, via insurance.
That's changed then since I actually went to do my genetic testing, because I spent an hour and a half with a genetics counselor before I could even do the testing. Right. And she wanted as far back as I can think of. So I'm glad to hear that they're only going
there's so much work being done in genetics right now. It's kind of it's cool. It's good that it's happening now. I would have wished it happened years prior, right? But like I said, there's companies doing free genetic testing. Like some companies, you don't even need to like prove that you have like a first line relative with cancer to get the genetic testing done for free. There's companies out there that will do this for free. So Kimberly, it's fascinating, as we look at these timelines, right? Like how quickly some things have changed and other things haven't. So to get back, your mom has had this cancer though. So she is now almost going on 9 years of surviving cancer.
Inoperable.
So we got to get her on the podcast at some point.
I know. And I wish that she was closer, because that's the first thing I thought of was popping her head in, but she's not very computer savvy these days.
That's all right. We can figure that out hopefully eventually. So did your mom then, I mean, I know you talked a bit, and we're going to get back to your story here. So did your mom ever do the genetic testing to see if she had that Lynch syndrome?
That was actually part of everything. Once I got my genetic testing done, my genetics counselor said we need to find out which side of the family this is, because they need to be tested. Their siblings should be tested. This is something that doesn't skip generations. There's a 50-50 chance of one or all of you guys having it. So my children, my grandchildren, my siblings, we all needed to be tested. So I called my mom, and she freaked out a little bit because she had just gone through all of this. She was in remission. She was doing fine, and she didn't understand what I was talking about or what I was trying to say to her. And I'm like, Mama, it's just a blood test. It'll be fine. So we just got to figure out what side it came from. And she goes, well, is there anything? I said, Mom, no, you don't have to do anything. You're in remission. You're fine. This doesn't change anything. It just might change how your doctor does some testing in the future. So we did. We got her tested, and she has MSH2 as well. So came from her. My sister got tested. Now 2 of my 3 brothers have been tested. So far, everybody's negative. My one brother just got tested, so we don't have his results back yet. I've had 2 of my 4 children have been tested. One is a twin. So the other twin kind of is just automatically thinking she has it, but I told her you need to go get it done so that you could be treated properly and do the preventative stuff. But my one twin is positive. She has MSH2.
How old?
She's 30. She just turned 31. My oldest daughter just turned 36 a couple days ago. She came back negative. My other twin is in Florida. She hasn't gotten tested yet. My son is just turned 26 in April, and he hasn't gotten tested yet, but he knows that that's coming. He needs to do it. So, so far, just me and then one of my twin daughters.
Knowledge is power, as we say, I think the one thing, and we'll get back to the journey here, but knowing that you have these genetic markings, these genetic factors is so powerful. And this is like where I think we hope that eventually the entire pancreatic cancer space goes to, because there is a difference in treating genetic patients than there are just like, as they call it, sporadic risk. People who just get this cancer just because of getting pancreatic cancer. And we were just talking about this the other day, Kimberly. We have been very involved in the genetic space with screening and surveillance. And I've said this time and time again. I mean, if you look at the chart of people who are staged at earlier stage in this cancer, like it just goes like this, right? And screening and surveillance allows you to do that, right? To hopefully get these cancers early. But also, I think the one thing with this cancer, it's just the awareness, right? Like if you have these genetic mutations, I think you become more aware of like what's really going on with your body. And then you have that knowledge that, so like when you do go to a GI or you go to your GP and you're experiencing, some sort of issue, whether it's, heartburn or, GI issues coming out of the other end, that if you have this information of genetics, like it just kind of, I think, moves the diagnosis a little bit quicker, right? If that makes sense in terms of like the clinicians trying to pinpoint what is actually going on here, or they can check that off the box, like, hey, all right, like we need to do an MRI of the pancreas or an EUS of the pancreas just to rule anything out that could possibly be there because of this genetic predisposition. And that's powerful, right? Like that's a big piece of this puzzle in early detection and detecting this disease early on, that, is important for people with these genetic mutations.
Right.
So let's get back to, so you go through this genetic testing.
Then I had it tested. And then she immediately referred me to oncology to start doing Lynch Syndrome protocols, baselines and things like that. So we right away did an MRI. We did a CT of the chest, abdomen, and pelvis. We did, I should probably back up a little bit because I had found out I had a bunch of polyps when I had my colonoscopy, but everything was benign, but a bunch. And then he called me and told me that I can come back in 3 years because there were so many polyps. And I said, I don't know if you want to do that. And he goes, why? And I said, remember that genetic testing I told you about? And he said, yeah. And he said, what'd they say? And I said, MSH2. And he goes, oh, because we'll see you back next year.
Yeah.
So now I have to have yearly colonoscopies, which is part of the Lynch Syndrome protocol. But moving forward, back to where I was, she had me do the MRI, the CT, and she did have me do a baseline EUS.
Mm-hmm.
In this area, there were no doctors that did the EUS. I had to either go to Waterloo, which is an hour and a half, almost 2 hours away, or I had to go to Iowa City to the university. They preferred Waterloo because that was still the Unity Point. They were keeping it in the same system. So I went there. And then the following year, and everything was fine at that point. And they also do tumor markers, and they do a urinalysis because for bladder. Went back a year later and decided to do the hysterectomy as a preventative. And then it was time. A year had gone by. Time to do the MRI and the tumor markers and the CT. Or no, that we just started with the MRI. MRI came back and showed a 1.1 centimeter signal on my pancreas. And I went in and...
So this was new from the previous MRI. So they're seeing something there saying, okay.
Exactly. 1 year later. Year. Literally 1 year. And I had known about the Lynch for 2 years. So she said, we need to do the pancreatic protocol like we did as a baseline last year. And I said, so CT and EUS again? And she said, yes. So we did the CT that also showed the 1.1 centimeter signal is what they called it. They didn't call it a tumor. They called it a signal. It was, it was when I looked on, and I have some experience in this because this is what I used to do. When I looked at the MRI, the films, I could see it, but it didn't look like anything really prominent was really there. I mean, so I kind of get why this happened with what I'm going to tell you next. But when we went to go do the EUS so that we could actually biopsy it, the doctor I had in Waterloo had left. New guy didn't want to touch it because of where it was located, because it was such a difficult spot. Because for people that don't know what an EUS is, they basically really go down your throat with this little micro needle and do everything they can, because they got to put you out to do it, to not nick and cut anything going down, so that they could get to the pancreas where they're actually getting the biopsy. It's a complicated and difficult and essentially dangerous procedure. So they went ahead and referred me back to Iowa City. Iowa City is actually where I used to be a CMA in the oncology department. So it felt like home. So I was good with that option. And then I spoke with with GI that I was referred to there. And he looked at the films and the results, and he said, I don't think we need to do this. I said, I don't see what they're seeing. I don't think this is anything. Sure, there's something there. There's a shadow there, but I don't think we need to do this. And I just was a little bit beside myself. He goes, let me call my radiologist here and have her look at it. She's one of the top in the country. And this is a big teaching hospital, the University of Iowa. And he's just like, she says, I think she's fine. We don't need to do this. Maybe just watch it. And I couldn't accept that answer.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. And he said, do you need peace of mind? And I said, no, I have a gut feeling. And I said, and this is a Lynch syndrome protocol. This is the protocol. Let's just do it. Yeah. And he said, I'll do it. If you need peace of mind, I'll do it. And I said, I need you to do it. So he did it a month later. They did another CT before I had the procedure. The signal had grown from a 1.1 to a 1.6. Not much, but
going in the wrong direction.
Going in the wrong direction, correct. Even my tumor markers didn't show that there was anything going on.
Yeah.
So he did it. And when I was coming out of anesthesia, he was standing over me, apologizing to me. He said, "I'm so sorry. I have so much respect for this doctor because they just don't do that." He said, "I tried so hard to talk you out of this and you wouldn't let me, and I'm glad you didn't." And I said, "So what are we looking at?" And he goes, "It looks like an adenocarcinoma, but the good thing is it looks like it's very local. It's not all over the place. We could probably just go straight to a Whipple procedure and cut it out of there." And I knew the doctors there, and I said, "Who are your surgeons?" And he rattled off a whole bunch of them. And I heard one that I used to room his patients for, and I said, "I'll take him." So Dr. James Howe is world renowned, top in the country. He's one of the head of the hospital. I insisted that he be the one to do it, and he did take my case. And then he referred me to for the oncology. I went and saw him fairly soon, right after they jumped on it. They jumped on it fast. I went and saw him. He had me do another CT. And he said, "It's looking," and it grew some more, just in that small amount of time. Usually that's a very, very silent, slow killer, pancreatic cancer. But it was growing. And so he said, "It looks like it's not wrapped around that vital vessel that everybody worries about to make you inoperable." That's what happened with my mom. It wrapped around that vital vessel, and so she was not operable. So they decided that instead of doing the Whipple procedure and then maybe some chemo, they decided to do chemo to shrink it away from that vessel, just to make it safer, because the Whipple is a very dangerous surgery, one of the hardest out there. And he referred me to a newer oncologist that had been there for about a year. Me being me, I was hoping for somebody that I had known already, but they had all retired. So I met Dr. Naomi Fay. She's young, but he made a very, very huge point to me. She's young. She's coming out with all the newest knowledge. I'm old. So you got a little bit of the traditional with the new. And as a team, we can make great things happen. And I agree with that, because they did. So I went and met with the new oncologist, and we weren't quite sure which way. There's different chemo protocols that they can use. And they weren't sure quite what to do with me. And I just kind of blurted out, "Well, I do." And she said, "What?" And I said, "Call my mother's oncologist, because she's stage 3 advanced inoperable, and she's still with us." And she said, "What?" And so she said, "All right." So she did. She called she called her doctor and asked what they treated her with. And so it was called FOLFIRINOX, and it was a rough cocktail. But she said, "I would like to go even further aggressive with you." And because with me having Lynch syndrome and not being your typical case, 5-FU is a chemo drug that does not work with colon cancer for patients that have Lynch syndrome. But immunotherapy does. So she said, "I kind of want to just kind of hit you a little hard." And I said, "Do whatever you have to do." And so we did 8 rounds of FOLFIRINOX, and 8 rounds of immunotherapy, Keytruda, at the same time, one on top of the other. I got pretty sick, but I kind of defied it a little bit. I actually handled it really well, probably better than a lot of people. From what she said, I did full FOLFIRINOX, full dose for 5 rounds. And she said, we got to dose reduce you. She tried dose reducing me after 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and I wouldn't let her. I said, no, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. I feel fine. Yes, I'm throwing up, but I feel fine. I throw up. I keep going. I was still working at my my digital marketing job with my amazing team no filter is what we call ourselves. I was working full time with them, and they treated me with kid gloves and were very, very supportive, no matter what I was doing. And they filled out all the paperwork, did all the things that needed to happen. So if I needed to take time off, I could take time off and not be penalized for it and still have my job. So, I mean, there were days that I would carry a bucket around, I would throw up, and I would start working again. It would happen all day long, but I'd keep working. I made the conscious choice before it even started that this was not in my control. It was not in my hands. This was in God's hands. This was nothing I could do about it. No point whining and crying about it. So I chose to be positive through the whole thing. So, and my mother and I learned that from my mother because she was the same way. Didn't hear one single complaint except for when she had to shave her head, which I actually had to do as well. My son did mine. So I went through those 8 rounds, and I had a really good response to it. And we almost stopped at round 7 because the response was so good. From there, they couldn't get me in for my Whipple. So I said, I don't want to go another 4 weeks without some kind of treatment going on. I'm afraid it'll get, So we did another round of chemo, waiting to be able to get into surgery. And then from what Dr. Howe told me when they opened me up, they didn't see any tumor anymore. It was essentially gone. And because of that, he changed my Whipple procedure from a standard Whipple to what they call a pylorus preserving Whipple. So they didn't take any of my stomach. They didn't take any of my intestines. They didn't take my jejunum. They just took the head of the pancreas where it was located. They took the duodenum, and they took the gallbladder. And that was on January 26th. So I'm about 5 months out from my Whipple procedure now.
Post-surgery, then you go back and do more chemo, I would assume?
I did. Yes. I did. My last chemo was at the beginning of December, and then I had my surgery January 26th because you had to be out of chemo for at least 4 weeks first. And then, like I said, when he opened me up, the tumor was basically gone. So he switched it up and did a pylorus preserving. And I just lost my train of thought. This is what happens with chemo brain. What was your?
All right. So the post-op chemo, how many rounds? What usually they do, it depends. I mean, every doctor, clinician, I've heard anywhere
typically
from 4.
12. It depends on how. Yeah. It depends on where you are in your cancer. It depends on what stage you are. Now, grant you, I had not been staged at this point. They still hadn't staged me. I had asked so many times, and they wouldn't give me a staging at that point. So I went for my 1 or 2 week follow-up post-op, and he said, I want you to look at letter C on your report after your I do need to say one thing. I need to back up from my EUS when they found the cancer from the biopsy. This is where you were talking about when you have surgery, they are doing the genetic testing. They did further genetic testing. I'm also MSH6. So I have both MSH2, MSH6, and they also found BRCA2 positive. So
you got a lot of stuff going on.
I got a lot going on. Yeah. So then going back forward during that appointment, said, I want you to look at letter C. And so I read it and I said, does this say what I think it says? And he said, you had a 100% response to your chemo.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so what does that mean? Am I essentially cancer-free? And he goes, well, I can never say that, but yeah. You know? And he said, and I said, do you not usually see 100% response? And he goes, not in pancreatic cancer. Not typically. So I said, so then do I have to do any more chemo? And he said, well, He said, it's protocol, so let's leave that up to your oncologist. So I saw Dr. Faye the following week, and she said, I'm a protocol girl. She said, we could probably get by without it, but just to make sure there's no stragglers, we're going to do another 4 weeks of chemo. From that last round of chemo to after my surgery, I developed neuropathy. I didn't develop anything like that. I didn't have any of those problems that most people have while they're in it. I had nothing. Wow. I had a little nausea and a little diarrhea that most people have with chemo, but I had nothing else. I was fatigued, but I kept going. But because of the neuropathy, part of the fulfirinox, there's one called oxaliplatin. Mm-hmm. That's what causes the neuropathy. I did have some issues with coldness, but I didn't have the actual numbing or the neuropathy or the pain or anything like that most people get. I didn't have any of it. But I developed some after the fact, and they called it delayed neuropathy. So now I have some in my fingertips and my toes and the balls of my feet, but it's tingly up to halfway up my calves on both legs. So she decided that because I had 100% response prior and I've now had the surgery, that she was going to totally remove the oxaliplatin so I wouldn't have lifelong neuropathy. This will hopefully eventually come back. I'm in support groups where they've said that it's come back. Their feeling has come back, but it took 2 years. My mom, she's 9 years in remission. She still has it. So it's going to be different, I'm sure, with everybody. But I did do the other medications at a dose reduced level, so I wouldn't be so sick. Didn't handle it well.
How many rounds?
Total 12.
So 12 post.
No. 4 post.
So just 4. Okay. So the 8 prior, then the 4 post, and then you rang the bell on the 22nd. Mm-hmm. On your last, and on
April 22nd. Yep.
That's awesome. So it's interesting, because usually with BRCA too, and you mentioned that with the BRCA family, that platinum-based drug is really what makes a difference. But it's interesting that, well, maybe because you had that 100% response in that first go around, that maybe she just felt that it just wasn't necessary. Neuropathy is one of those things. I mean,
it's not fun.
No,
and fall down and go boom when you can't feel your feet.
yeah, and so many people deal with that, and I feel like there's so many things. I know that I just saw someone posted on social media somewhere about this electric mat that shoots like little shocks into the bottom of your feet to try to waken up the nerves, but and
interesting you say that, because just yesterday I got it in the mail.
The mat?
No, a vibration plate.
Oh, okay.
I stand on, and
it's supposed to wake up the nerves. Yep. Yeah, this was kind of interesting. It's a mat, like you sit in a chair and then you just put it down on the ground and then you put your feet on top, and it sends these little shocks through the balls of your feet and the bottoms of your feet to awaken those nerve endings, right? Yeah.
That's why I got it.
Yeah, I mean, I say this, but like I've never experienced neuropathy. So it's easy for me to say, I guess I'll preface this. Like if that's like the worst case coming out of this, I know we have had people say like, hey, to your point, maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't, but I'm here. Right. And
That's exactly it.
It's that one piece of this science that we still don't understand. This disease is super complex, and I think, as we said in the very beginning, right, knowledge is power in knowing your genes, and it does make a difference. Unfortunately, I don't think the treatment side has caught up just yet, and I know there's a lot happening with the Keytruda with the immunotherapy, and that's like the one place when we think about immunotherapy, I know it's kind of been a failure in pancreatic cancer. I mean, there's been the CAR T cell immunotherapy has not worked at all. A lot of this other stuff. But then when you look at like Lynch syndrome and you look at the genetics piece, it's totally different in terms of treatment. And, Keytruda's worked really well for, Lynch syndrome and for patients with these, genetic markers. And I just go back to how we started this conversation. Genetics is such an important piece. And if you're at a center that is not genetic testing, as I mentioned, that report that said only 40% of patients were genetic tested, even though it's a mandate by the government, like you have to seriously advocate for yourself. Which I did
when I was doing that biopsy. He didn't think I needed to do it. And I'm just like, And she wanted to advocate my care for when I was going through the treatment. She wanted to dose reduce me several times because most people dose reduce around second round. I said, no, just keep going. I feel fine. Just keep going. If it's working, I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to prolong it. I don't want to drag it out. Let's just do it. If we need to be aggressive, be aggressive. And that's what we did. And that is the key right there, though. Like you were saying, for pancreatic cancer, what my oncologist told me is she said, some people respond, some people don't respond. But Lynch syndrome is a little funny character in the mix. So let's see what happens. So we did. And shockingly enough, and she said the same thing that my surgeon said when I went and saw her and asked her, do I have to do any more? Because the surgeon said I was 100% responding. And she said, yeah, and we don't see that with pancreatic. She goes, I've never seen it with pancreatic cancer. Not 100% response. So I said, is anybody ever going to give me a staging? What stage was it? She finally said to me, maybe one. She said, maybe one or two.
Well, if you're surgical, they wouldn't. I mean, I've put many surgeons on the mic. Mic'd them and said, okay, like where do we draw the line? And, as soon as it becomes metastatic, which is, if you look at the staging guidelines, that's 3 or 4, they don't operate. So, most surgeons will not, I'm going to say most, probably 99.8% of the surgeons won't operate if it's beyond stage 2.
My mom's stage 3 inoperable, but it hasn't spread to any other parts of her body. It's nobody under her doctor has even admitted, I don't know what is going on here. This is not typical. And that's when she found out about the Lynch, and he goes, oh no, maybe that's why. Maybe this is what's making sense.
Yeah. The piece that we talk about often is this genetics piece, right? And understanding. And I think as we continue to delve into this, disease, we'll hopefully learn more and more about other genes that potentially, have success stories like Lynch syndrome and like BRCA2 patients, because of the treatment protocol and because of the understanding on how those types of cancers develop versus just a sporadic risk of just a normal cancer without a genetic profile. Mm-hmm. I got a couple questions here for you. Sure. So first one, do you think, like you said, your experience prior, like you were in the medical system, and how I preface this question is like often as the host and listening to the story, like people go through certain things in their life. Mm-hmm. Probably went into that career not thinking like, hey, when I get pancreatic cancer, this is going to help me. But if you look back at all that time that you spent in the medical field, like you said, like the surgeon ripped off these names and you remember the one name of the guy that you knew was really
That's
good.
my surgeon.
So do you ever think, like, have you thought, I know this is kind of fresh, like, do you look back at the experience that you had in the medical system and how that helped you through your own journey?
1,000,000%. My mom's a nurse too. Absolutely. I had knowledge. It does help. So, and now, like you talked about, people need to advocate when they go through these things. That's what I want to do. I want to help other people. I got very lucky, very lucky. So to me, everything starts with the genetics. So in my mind, here's a statistic for you. 1 in 279 people, this is how more common it is than people realize. 1 in 279 people have Lynch syndrome. 95% don't even know it. That's sad. Genetics needs to come into play. It needs to start there, if you ask me, because it saved my life. Because had I listened to that doctor and didn't end up doing that EUS and just trusted him, oh, we don't need to do this. And then we waited another year to do my usual Lynch syndrome protocol. Who knows where I would be today? Who knows what stage that would have been ended up in after a year, of sitting on it. My mom, God bless her, she was a nurse. Pancreatic cancer is almost always found in stage 4. My mother, because she was a nurse, knew that she needed to be, which is kind of almost silly because people in the medical field will typically try and treat themselves or diagnose themselves and not go. And that's what she did. She held off as long as she could until it wasn't so good anymore. And she got lucky that they found it in stage 3. Very lucky, because she was a nurse and she had the knowledge. But for people that don't have that background, I don't know what to say.
I think it's hard to force people to do certain things if they're not comfortable.
Right. I agree.
And I think advocating for oneself sometimes, as obvious as it may seem, but it isn't as easy. And I also think, though, too, Kimberly, like the systems are, and this isn't a knock on doctors or nurses or clinicians, I should say. The system is just so big, and we're never going to change that system. And doctors aren't doing anything malicious here, but I think the way that the system operates, one, there's stresses in the system. Look at COVID. COVID was
a lot of insurance driven.
Yeah, well, that's the other factor. Like, we really want to go down that road.
Yeah, probably cover that.
But there's all these exterior things that complicate the system, right? And one of them is insurance, staffing, COVID, I think, was a prime example, right? Like, one big kick to the system to inundate every hospital network with people that are ill with a virus, right? Or with this thing that was happening. Mm-hmm. And this is not a COVID, real, not real. I'm not talking about that stuff.
I know.
I'm just talking about this, like what that did for the system. Like you said, like no one was going to the doctors. Doctors weren't seeing anyone. So you think about, like, okay, you have this mass event that happens and it puts a ripple into the system. Yep. And these ripples in the system, and sometimes it's insurance, right? Sometimes it's even access. You bring up, the cisplatinum. Cisplatinum last year was impossible to find. Like, there was a cisplatinum shortage in the entire world. That's a ripple in the system, right?
It was major chemo drug.
Major chemo drug. But you know why? Because they don't make any money on it because it works and it's effective. It's actually an effective drug in colon cancer that actually works really, really well, but they make like 5 cents on it. So they
charge us.
Mysteriously they had a shortage because they're not making any money, and they blamed it on 2 bad batches of tractor trailer loads of 2 batches that were bad after QC. Okay, but so anyways, you back to the point. There's these ripples, right? And sometimes you need some of these things to happen to certain individuals that they advocate, but normally people don't, right? And again, it's not that the doctors are doing anything wrong, but I always say it's like this don't ask, you don't get kind of system, right? Like if patients don't know what to ask,
exactly,
they're not going to get certain things. And it's not like you get an a la carte menu when you walk into the oncology suite, right? But I think, your experience here, but then also, the family history, which, we've talked a lot about this here, about the genetics piece. If people watching or listening have a strong family history of not pancreatic cancer, but any cancer in general, all cancers, you need to be aware of screening and surveillance. And I think your story is such a testament to, understanding genetics, but then also, just because you understand it, you still have to be in surveillance, because that is, like you said a couple times, I have it down here, like baseline. Like you need to get that baseline. So when, we talk often about roadmaps in cancer development. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this or if anyone's ever said this. And I've interviewed a lot of really, really smart clinicians. This is not me making this stuff up. Mm-hmm. And the question that I always ask is, how long does it take for pancreatic cancer to start? I've gotten the answer. Sometimes they say, we don't know. Some people have said, well, it's up to 10 years. So you have this cancer in your body. And now think about what's been said here, 10 years, but it's 10 years to when symptoms actually start, right? So you have these lesions that start as cancer, then you have it become a centimeter, then it's 1.1, 1.5. But you really don't have symptoms that are recognizable.
I have none.
Excuse me.
So then we're getting jaundice and yellow on the outside.
Correct. But now think about this.
You're in stage 4.
the 10-year mark. Mm-hmm. I've even had people say, well, okay, so now if you have a family history, now this is before knowing BRCA or anything. I've had clinicians say, well, you really shouldn't get into screening until 10 years from when their parent, let's say you had a parent diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So let's say the parent was 69 when they were diagnosed. Mm-hmm. Then the child shouldn't start real rigorous screening until 10 years prior to that, 59. So if you look at yours, I think you said your mom was 69 at the time when she was diagnosed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were in your mid 50s. So the timeline there is kind of like, it's kind of eerie when we talk.
It is, like, it's in the 10-year range, isn't it? Almost.
It's in that 10, almost. I mean, so at 10 years. Yeah. I mean, it's plus or minus, we're talking about here from statistics, like this is plus or minus. You're in that range of 2 to 3 years plus or minus. So it's kind of eerie thinking about like what I've heard and what science has said is like, hey, 10 years prior surveillance, plus or minus, in that range, and you're in this screening and surveillance program, and boom, you pop at that time. That's kind of a little scary.
It is scary, but I think this goes back to that's what they say for everybody across the board. Okay. I have Lynch syndrome. I'm not the same.
Yeah.
So what is it for that group of people?
We don't know, right? But like if you have these,
and I'm going to tell you because I am in several support groups. Okay. There's kiddos in their 20s with pancreatic cancer, in their 30s with pancreatic cancer, in their 40s with pancreatic cancer. So how can their parent didn't ever have it. You can have Lynch syndrome and not have cancer. You could be a carrier and not ever end up getting it.
Right.
The colon cancer is 80% with Lynch syndrome, MSH2 by the time you're 80. So who knows when you get it? And some people don't make it until they're 80 because they have other issues, But there's just so many factors that can come into play here. I still don't agree with we'll do it in the 10-year mark from when your family did it. No, get the dang genetic testing done and start there.
I don't disagree with that. I think the 10-year mark to me is just something that I've heard before. And then hearing your story, like you're, again, plus or minus in that range, it's just a little airy. That's when, and you're in that screening and surveillance.
And you're like, how much more are they not telling us?
Yeah. I mean, to me, like screening and surveillance should start like as soon as you have genetics, whatever your genetic markup is, whether you're 20 years old, 30 years old, or 40 years old. And, if your parent or grandparent
start at 18. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
When I asked my doctor when my son, because he was 26, and they said, well, you can do I would say, because there's kids his age and younger that have been diagnosed with either colon cancer or pancreatic cancer, or some kind of something because of the Lynch syndrome. But if he tests positive, he should start colonoscopies at age 25.
Correct. Yeah, the guidance, colon
Get the genetic testing done at 18, do your surveillance and your preventative during that time, and then go from there, But start with the genetic testing, dang it.
It's critical. It's life-changing. I've got 2 questions here left for you, and then we're going to share where our audience can connect with you. But these last 2, I always say, Kimberly, they're loaded. There's no right or wrong to it.
Okay.
Given your experience and everything you've gone through in your journey, what advice would you give to someone who just got diagnosed and is listening to this podcast?
As scary as it is, and as hard as it is to say this, try not to get into your head. Try not to jump the gun and think too far ahead. Take it a step at a time. Try not to do the what ifs. Trust your doctors. Try and stay as positive as you can, because your mind controls your whole body. And positive mind, positive things happen. Negative mind, negative things happen. That's how I feel about it. If you are a faithful person, give it to God, let it go, and just keep moving. Stay as positive as you can, but try as best as you possibly can to find a medical team and a medical hospital that is an NCI certified hospital. That's your bigger teaching hospitals. That's where you're going to find they have the ability to do that. They do research. It's what they do. Get into an NCI hospital setting or with an NCI team that's certified. That is where I ended up at the University of Iowa. And they saved my life. So
it's powerful stuff.
They're the best in my eyes.
Our last question here, and again, this is loaded. There's no right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Given what you've experienced, how do you define the term pancreatic cancer? What's your definition of it?
It's no longer a death sentence. You can beat it.
I love it. Kimberly, thank you for allowing us to share your journey. It's an inspiring one, and one that, I've said this before when we've had people on here with genetics, like knowledge is power, and knowing the genetic makeup, if you have some of these genes, getting into screening and surveillance, you are, as I said before, the poster child, for this, because it does matter, getting a cancer in an early stage and having the options that you had is critical, and knowing your genetic makeup is so critical. It's so critical. And I do feel this whole space, I think cancer as a whole is moving very fast in that direction. And I do hope for a lot of the folks, I know we mentioned it, it's 10% of the cases and, there's this 80%, but I do feel that's going to shrink a bit because there's so many other things that are happening in the genetic space and hopefully new genes that they're finding and families that have like long list of people who have cancers in their family, but they don't have any like the BRCA or the Lynch or the Palpies. But I feel like that's kind of, we're on this kind of tipping point where genetics is vastly moving and hopefully finding new discoveries in terms of genes and what turns on these cancers, and in particular pancreatic cancer. So right. Thank you for allowing us to share your journey. Our last thing here, if there's a place where someone watching or listening can follow you or reach out to you, where's the best place for that? I know you mentioned, I think, Instagram before, but I don't know if that's
I'm actually not on Instagram. That actually really surprised me because when they reached out to me on Instagram, it had probably been sitting in that inbox for about 3 weeks before I responded because I'm not typically on Instagram. I am always on Facebook.
Awesome.
I do have a little side gig business that I do. So I am on Facebook all the time. You can, and my profile, my personal timeline is open to the public, completely open.
What's that Facebook page?
It's just Kimberly Brockman, Kimberly, Brockman, Brockman. Anybody that wants to reach out to me and needs somebody to talk to, I'm here for them. That's my heart. So
awesome.
I'm more than happy to help anybody. But the other thing that I wanted to say, back to that question of what I think about what I could tell others, advocate for yourself too. If something doesn't feel right with the doctor that you're with, or you're not getting the answers that you think you should have, do the research, reach out to me, get into some support groups that are on Facebook or whatever, even locally in your area, and advocate for yourself and do your research. Don't go down an internet rabbit hole because that's the wrong thing. I used to have to tell my patients that all the time. Don't go down that road. But make sure you're talking to the right thing. Support groups are great because those are people that have been through it, but definitely, always get a second opinion. Always get a second opinion.
So powerful. Kimberly, thank you for sharing your journey here on the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
It's been an honor. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like today's episode, feel free to share this episode and make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Until next time, please be safe and thanks for listening.